Bright Courtroom, which was recently updated. Generous donations to the law school. We are very excited about this space. For those of you who graduated from U of L Law, you will probably remember this as a room with orange chairs and very dark wood paneling. And for a long time, it was our hope to update the facility, and we've now achieved that, and I think it's turned into a wonderful space that is both a modern classroom, once again a classroom, and a place where we can hold trial events again. So we're very excited that you're here. The event we're holding tonight is one of the reasons that we wanted to do this update, so that we could host events like this. And I'm so glad that you're all here to join us for the 100th anniversary of the Louisville Legal Aid Society, an organization that has wonderful ties to the community, has been a great resource for our citizens, and also a wonderful partner for the law school over the years. Not only have we had the good fortune of many of our graduates take jobs at Legal Aid, but also extensive externship opportunities, and it's a partner with our law clinic downtown. So I want to welcome all of you to our facility, and thank you for coming here to the Brandeis School of Law. I'd like to introduce Neva Scott, who is the current director of the Legal Aid Society, and thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry. Your board of directors, I apologize, I got it wrong. Welcome, Kendrick
Riggs. Thank you, Dean. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you to the University of Louisville for hosting the event. You've been a great partner to Louisville Legal Aid. 100 years. What a remarkable milestone. On the United States Supreme Court, the inscription reads, "Equal justice under the law." And for 100 years, Louisville Legal Aid has played a very central part in this community in trying to achieve that ever higher goal. And we're here tonight to celebrate, to begin the celebration all of this remaining year and next year of our centennial. So what an exciting tribute, and thank you so much for having us. I want to also acknowledge a couple of people in this room, and if they're not, perhaps they're watching remotely. We have some board members that have contributed greatly over the years. Our board is very active. It is a very dynamic board. I'm very proud of their service. But in particular, we have 3 board members that I want to recognize that collectively their years of service exceed our 100 years of existence. I recognize Jim Strauss. Jim, would you stand? Is Bob Ewald here tonight? With the masks, I can't tell. Mr. Ewald just completed his 50th year of service to our board. That's an astounding commitment of service. And also Marshall Eldred, who I don't believe is here either this evening. These 3 board members collectively have served Legal Aid for well over 100 years, and their service is a testament to all of us of the importance of this organization. We're honored to have Mayor Fisher this evening with us, and he's going to make a special proclamation. Mayor Fisher, I would invite you to the podium.
Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Nice to be with you all on this very important occasion here tonight. I just want to thank the Legal Aid Society for all they've done for 100 years here in our city. And we'll hear a little bit more about the history, but when you think back to 1920 and how life has changed a tad bit since then, an amazing amount of good has been done by the Legal Aid Society. In our administration, they've been particularly helpful with us with eviction prevention issues, re-entry issues, and the thing that always strikes me when I see you all in action is the humility that you are exercising appropriately when you are working with people that frankly usually are really hard and down and out on their luck. And they're looking for people to treat them with dignity and respect that they deserve. And too often that doesn't happen in our society. And so you all really walk the talk of our city value of compassion, helping people to get straightened out, and I just appreciate it. I mean, you're an organization of highly qualified professionals, and the fact that you step up to help like this, I think just says a lot about your heart, and says a lot about our city. I'm old-fashioned, and I think we were all born to make the world a better place, and you all use that gift that you have to really do that in a highly, highly leveraged way, and changing people's lives for the better because of that. So I just want to really humbly say thank you to you all for this, and for those here today, Jim and others that have done this for decades in the community, and hopefully we got a few folks in here that maybe are just in their first, second, or third year that'll say, I'm going to be doing this for decades to come as well. So this is not a mayoral presentation or society if I don't have a proclamation. So I'm happy to come here, and Neva and Kendrick, if you guys could accept this on behalf of the Legal Aid Society, please. This is the City of Louisville honoring the Legal Aid Society as we celebrate 100 years of compassionate service. And since 1921, the Legal Aid Society has helped countless people through challenging times to ensure equal access to justice, no matter their income. The attorneys and staff who've made the Legal Aid Society tick for 100 years have been indispensable to people in need who face the loss of home or family, health, or economic crisis. So our city joins the Legal Aid Society team and their board in celebrating 100 years of tremendous work, and wishes them the best as they forge into a new century, ready to help even more people. So God bless you all. Thank you all very much for your fantastic work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Fisher. Thank you, Chair Riggs and Dean Laura Smith. It's very good to be here with you today. And as I look out this room, I just want to say hello to all of you wonderful people out there. I see board members, family members, friends, current legal aiders, prior legal aiders, volunteers, community members. As I look out, I just see that you are all an incredibly invested bunch of folks in Louisville, Kentucky, the 15 counties that we serve, and I'm just thrilled to get to be here. I've always felt in working in this position, it was just an honor to work with you. So welcome to your 100th anniversary of the Legal Aid Society, and I want you to give yourselves an applause for whatever role you play in doing this. In this space tonight, we greet the moment in time when Legal Aid Society becomes 100 years of age. At this very moment, we speak some of the very same words that our predecessors spoke. Help, service, need, community, clients, justice. We lift our voices and our minds to the thought that justice requires more than words. It requires intent. It requires action. More than 100 years ago, in this moment, members of our community put those words, spoke those words into action, and Legal Aid Society came into being. And we are here because of them and people like you that invest every single day in making justice a reality in our community. I would be remiss not to note that also right now, we share in the grief of our fellow Kentuckians and community members who are suffering as a result of the tornadoes that ripped through our state just a few days ago. It's going to take us a while, I think, to grasp the level of that tragedy. And when I think about the communities that are suffering as a result of that, I know that there's a reason that we all serve, there's a reason we're called to help, and there's a reason that we are here tonight to celebrate that call that we received to serve the community. Many of you know that Legal Aid Society serves Louisville, Kentucky, but we serve also a full 15 county service area. We serve Breckenridge, Bullitt, Grayson, Hardin, Henry, Jefferson, LaRue, Marion, Meade, Nelson, Oldham, Shelby, Spencer, Trimble, and Washington counties here in Kentucky. And we also serve alongside 3 other sister agencies, Kentucky Legal Aid, Legal Aid of the Bluegrass, and Apple Red Legal Aid. During this difficult time, like many difficult times we've been through before, we stand together ready to serve our community. Our hearts go out to those who have suffered profound loss. The core of what Legal Aid Society is service. And as we turn our minds to 1921 tonight, we know that Legal Aid Society came into being amidst trials and tribulations and fights for justice. As we begin our centennial journey this year, we look back. We take stock of where we've been, we celebrate the successes, we think about the failures, and then we look ahead. We look ahead to the next 100 years of legal aid, the next 100 years of service. When we look back and when we look forward, there's a common thread in Legal Aid Society and a common thread of all of you here tonight. And it's a flame for justice. It's a flame for justice that you carry, that you nurture, that you are the steward of. And that is the common denominator that brought us to this 100th year birthday. And it's the same common denominator that will bring us into the next 100 years. As you carry that flame of justice, your flame of justice is unique to you. You are special. Each and every one of you have a unique reason that calls you to this work and calls you to serve in this community. As we're here tonight, I want you to know that I'm so glad that each one of you chose to be here in this special moment, and I hope that you, like I, will remember this in the years to come. I am very excited to introduce to you tonight someone who I really don't think needs my introduction, Dr. Tom Owens. I feel like many of you know Dr. Owens. Dr. Owen has been an archivist at U of L's Archives and Special Collections for 40 years. Over those years, he has helped identify, describe, and care for the historical records of many organizations and groups. His care and expertise in our history here in Louisville has made him one of our best-known historians and a local icon for all things history. He is known for his frequent neighborhood walks and tours, producing radio and TV features, writings, and giving talks on a variety of subjects. And if that were not enough, he also served our community in the Board of Aldermen and on Louisville Metro Council from 1990 to 1999, and then again in 2003 to 2015. Dr. Owen served as a representative for the Highlands neighborhood, where he was a strong advocate for fairness, environmental sustainability, and community activism. Dr. Owen holds degrees from Kentucky Wesleyan College, Methodist Theological School in Ohio, University of Louisville, and the University of Kentucky. Dr. Owen, I'm proud to introduce you tonight, and I'd like you to welcome you, and I hope you all will join me in welcoming him.
It's amazing. I recognize a goodly number of you from the top of the mask up. I'm honored to be here this evening. There is one correction on the introduction. My season thus far at Archives and Special Collections at the University of Louisville is 46 years, still counting, I am on my bicycle again today, as usual, although it's a little unclear as to whether I'll pedal to a 29 and throw it on a number 29 eastbound, or whether I'll just go ahead and pedal home. But I do live virtually every day still as a bicyclist, which I may be good for the system, but I'm not sure. We'll see how that all plays out in time. By the way, just as I was sitting there, I was thinking of where I've been in the last 36, 48 hours as an archivist. Tomorrow I talk to Dr. Charles Parrish's daughter Ursula, who's in California, about some archival matters. Today, as a University of Louisville Libraries blog, I spoke of and summarized an oral history interview that I did in July with an 88-year-old resident of Indianapolis who spent his days on Old Walnut Street, and his family was a first resident of the Beecher Terrace housing project on Muhammad Ali. He died, incidentally, just 3 weeks ago. And then in addition to that, I'm always interested in the African American related collections that we have at our archives, and I always focus on the scrapbooks of Charles W. Anderson Jr. Does that name mean anything to you? You talking about a monstrous attorney at law, African American here in this community, who died unexpectedly and tragically in the right at 1960, as I recall. But we have his papers that were recently donated to our archives. I've been asked to think of a season when legal aid had its beginning. Now, I've construed that season fairly broadly, and as I look back and put my finger on the forces of reform and repression, arm wrestling for the stage presence in our community. 100 years ago, Legal Aid of Louisville's campaign to bring legal representation to the poor joined other progressive forces on either side of the 1920s to drag us toward meeting our better angels. But make no mistake about it, there were plenty of sinister trends welling up in the season immediately before and after World War I that will make Louisville more violent, intolerant, and a more inhumane place. And so those forces, is this true about any time that we look back at? I suspect there's always that tension between those forces. The campaign to get organized legal help for those who couldn't afford it was first championed in 1909. It came out of the Women's Club of Louisville. It was rekindled again in 1914 through the Organized Associated Charities of Louisville in cooperation with the Louisville Bar Association. A report that was prepared 2.5 years later down the road noted that there had been 171 legal aid type cases that had been prepared and dealt with in that earlier season. But during World War I itself, it seems like the push for a permanent legal aid was kind of put on a back burner, and things were quiet for a season. But then they came back in full force in 1921, because that was the year that there was a formal creation of a board and a chartering of an organization. And by very early 1922, in the Realty Building, which was right across from the Jefferson County Courthouse, there at Armory Place and Jefferson on the south side, in that 10-floor building was the office, the first office of legal aid. And in that year, the board also petitioned for what became the community chest and ultimately Metro United Way for a $6,100 appropriation that would help them in their work. In addition to that, the new organization quickly filed a case to break up the collusion between several local elected magistrates from the suburbs and a business, which was a loan shark business, essentially. And they filed that case and worked hard on that case as they worked for the working poor. In those early days, what was called the worthy poor, if they could afford it, they were charged 50 cents for seeking the help of legal aid. What was Louisville like when the league was, when legal aid was born? Well, in 1922, it provokes wonder about what things were like in that season. Clearly, there were a few glimmers of hope for the lives of common folk, mixed with giant clouds of disruption and disorder. It was as if Louisville's preoccupation with war on the home front, compounded by an almost one-year bout with the influenza, had quieted many of the public debates. But to me, as those surging forth of the public debates occurred, it seems to me in simplistic terms that the biggest single force that was afoot was the challenges that were going on in American cities and the reaction to those challenges by the rural and small town folk of America. Because changes were clearly afoot in American cities. And the changing face of urban America, which was represented most forcefully by a Protestant religious hegemony, that those values that they espoused were being challenged by newcomers, by more assertive African Americans, and by liberal progressives of a broad ilk. Old-time rural and small-town life was perceived to be under assault. Louisville, for instance, had participated fully in the great migration of African Americans into northern, not deep south cities. And that occurred here in Louisville. In fact, that led in 1914 to the creation of Louisville's NAACP, which they immediately set foot to challenge Louisville's 1913 housing segregation law that the Common Council had passed, the Board of Aldermen and the Lower Common Council, the legislative body of the city of Louisville had passed, and that housing segregation ordinance was challenged by the local NAACP and chased all the way to the United States Supreme Court in the case of Buchanan versus Warley, which they succeeded in overturning by the United States Supreme Court because the court, a conservative court, ruled that the police authority of the local government had been overstepped, that they had overstepped their bounds in trying to enforce block by block housing segregation in that housing segregation case. Very quickly thereafter, the new Louisville NAACP headed out to make another challenge of what was going on in Louisville, and that was in 1916 when the movie began playing in downtown movie theaters, Birth of a Nation, and the Democratic mayor went to see it and said, "I don't see anything wrong with it, it's just entertainment." But there was a change in the next election, and a Republican mayor was elected. And he then turned to an old 1906 state statute, which had been created, by the way, under some most interesting circumstances. And he used that state statute to ban the further showing of Birth of a Nation in Louisville. That does suggest that generally speaking, Louisville African Americans were closely aligned with the Republican Party. And as a result, in that case at least, they were able to get a nod of assent from a Republican mayor here in Louisville. With loyalty to that Republican Party, though African Americans in Louisville could never fully feel at home because, oh yes, in 1922, they did get the first African American police officer, a female, and the next year they got a whole unit of African American firefighters. Yes, They did get some concessions from the local party, but by the Louisville Parks Commissioners, they steadily eroded the right of African Americans to use our public parks. In 1922, the Parks Commissioners bought the Wayland Estate on Southwestern Parkway with clearly the thought of designating a park for a larger park exclusively for African Americans. And 2 years later, 2 local African American school teachers went on a streetcar and took their students to the southern Olmsted Park, Iroquois Park, and there they were accosted by whites. The cops were called, and the Parks Commissioners, because of the tension, closed the door to African American use of the public parks in 1924. So African Americans under the Republicans always never felt fully at home. So much so that there was a splinter group in 1921 with A.D. Porter Sr. being the mayoral candidate who ran on the Lincoln Independent Party, did not gain a whole lot of traction, but nevertheless it represents that fact that African Americans needed always to keep their eyes open and be prepared to shop around if they needed to politically. So that was, in addition to that, I think because of some possible progressive local leadership, both on the local level and at the state level, the state of Kentucky and Louisville escaped the whole panoply of race riots that occurred in the late teens and the early 1920s. East St. Louis, Chicago, Oklahoma City, Knoxville, Houston, Texas, a little bit earlier. These come quickly to mind. And as a result, I think because of some brave leadership on the part of the governor and the local mayor, we were able to avoid some of that kind of turmoil. But it was also in this season that there would be a resurgence, of course, of a modern Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan had been identified with the Deeper South in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. But this version of the Ku Klux Klan is a more urban version. And its animus is directed toward African Americans, but much, much more broadly. I mentioned the changes that American cities had been undergoing, with massive immigration from 1890 forward to American cities. Many of the people who were coming as immigrants to our community were coming from Eastern and Southern European countries, and therefore were suspect because of their religion. Many of them were Jewish. Some were different culturally in many, many ways. And so the Ku Klux Klan, which was the most leading chapter statewide of the Ku Klux Klan, was in the state of Indiana, just across the river, came on with a vengeance in the early 1920s. They were riding a wave of fear that immigrants were bringing too much change, too much challenge to the Protestant hegemony, too much difference, too much of change in American cities. And so their animus included Jews, Roman Catholics, and of course Asians had already been severely restricted in coming to this country. In fact, there had been an attempt to try to deal with the issue of the moment in the early 20s, which was a nationwide attempt to get an anti-lynching bill, a federal anti-lynching bill. It passed the U.S. House of Representatives in the very, very year that Legal Aid began its first full year of operation. It passed the House, but get ready for this. It was stalled in the U.S. Senate by a filibuster. But interestingly enough, in 1897, there was an anti-lynching statute passed in Kentucky, which is still on the books, which I found to be very, very, very fascinating. So here's what the Republican mayors said at the time of concern about the Ku Klux Klan. I will use, quote, every lawful means to suppress its growth in our community, and he forbade the street sale of its literature and Klan meetings. Many Klan meetings were in fact forced to leave Louisville and to hold their meetings in southern Indiana. Similarly, I mentioned what had happened on the state level as well. The Klans, and I've already noted this, the Ku Klux Klan's fear of immigrants was also part of that anti-city bias. I mentioned the Jews who had come to Louisville in the late 90s and the early 20th century. Several of those families and several other Jewish families were represented on the first board of legal aid, right? 6 of the 16 were either observant Jews or certainly were descendants of Jewish families, though they may have transcended to other religious traditions. And so 6 of the 16 were of a Jewish tradition of legal aid. And among them, of course, was Louis D. Brandeis' sister-in-law, Alfred's wife, Jenny, and she was on the board of legal aid for many, many years, and in fact, going back into the pre-World War I period, had been a strong, strong advocate for legal aid. And another name comes to mind, and that is a Jewish family. Grover Sales was his name. He was the first board chair and an 18-year board member of legal aid who, as an attorney in 1928, protested the proposed free use of the Jefferson County Armory, now called Louisville Gardens, for a Klan recruitment rally. Grover Sales was a strong, strong advocate for legal aid and also, ultimately, a strong representative for the national ACLU. All through that period, Grover Sales was a big, big person. Well, women had their say, and women got the right to vote after a 70-year struggle in August of 1920 with the passing of the 19th Amendment, culminating almost a 75 years of protest and advocacy. And how ironic it is that the popular culture emblem of the 1920s was a flapper, a woman dancer with shimmy, shimmy, shake, Charleston dance, which is just absurd in light of the serious struggle that had gone into getting that amendment passed. But the women were also involved. Not all women, but many, many women were also involved in the war against saloon politics, represented in many American cities by the Democratic Party. And that war led in this war of rural and small town, in many cases women, getting the war against alcohol passed in the form of the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution. That piece of progressive reform legislation, although it's hard for me to perceive it in those terms, was strongly supported by some women. It was clearly a triumph of values, of hearth over that saloon-based bossism that occurred in many American cities. But it also created a reign of lawlessness here in Louisville and across the nation. Let me give you a few quick examples of that early 1920s lawlessness that occurred as a result of Prohibition. Soft drink stands here in town could easily be fronts for the illegal sale of alcohol. And on And in July of 1922, a former police lieutenant was killed in a shootout with police and prohibition agents. Now, he had turned to the dark side. He was beginning to work with the alcohol forces. In addition to that, and this is the most startling example of all, in the Phoenix Hill neighborhood just east of downtown, there was a raid by federal prohibition agencies on a soft drink stand, and a crowd of 1,000 citizens quickly formed. Where's the internet? Where's your phone? Or how did they get word that the raid was turned? But 1,000 people appeared in the street and began abusing and in some cases assaulting the prohibition agents in protesting their raid on that soft drink stand. In addition to that, in September of 22, a whiskey agent was wounded in a shootout, and later the next month, five bandits bound and gagged the guard at the Rugby Distillery and escaped with $50,000 worth of whiskey. That's what I mean by lawlessness. Woo! You have seen evidence of reform in this season, haven't you? The women's vote mixed with the image of the liberated city woman. The rationalization of charitable giving, as you saw it, trying to number one, weed out corrupt charitable solicitation, and at the same time giving it some kind of rational basis as going on at this time. And yes, some progress on race, though very limited. But still, there were racist and newcomers, plus the failed social experiment regarding alcohol going, the racist and anti-newcomers legislation. Don't you know, in 1924, the door was virtually closed to immigrants except for those of northwestern Europe. And that was the closing of the door that affected so many Jews who were unable to escape Nazism in the 1930s. And so it is, as we turn toward home, looking back at legal aid. Legal aid was trying to stop legal shysterism, was trying to stop the garnishing of wages of poor people and the compounding of interest, which was further impoverishing them. They were determined also to give legal assistance to organizations that had been referring clients to them, like the Children's Protective Association, the Family Service Organization, the Jewish Welfare Federation, and the Gospel Mission. Those four institutions in the early days contributed 50% of the client referrals to legal aid at that time. The language that I see in the sources that I looked at, that legal aid was going to become a law dispensary, like a drugstore. Instead of medicines, a law dispensary. And they were going to be a society for facilitating justice for the poor and the unfortunate. In addition to that, they were going to try to stop the fact that many innocent prisoners were deprived of their liberty because of inadequate legal counsel. That's the spirit that we're celebrating here tonight. I close with words that are very, very simple and very, very familiar. With liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. This was a symbol, a sign in the back door that was to tell me 25 minutes had elapsed. I did not see the signals, so can I have an opportunity for a few questions and answers if you have them? Of anything I mentioned, anything that I provoked? Obviously, it was a wide-ranging potpourri of instances of what I would call repression, as well as the struggle toward justice on the part of our community. Yes, ma'am.
When you looked at the Women's Club connection, too, did you come across the fact that the Louisville League of Women Voters was founded in 1920 also?
Oh, that's, next time I give this talk, I'll sure note that. Thank you. League of Women Voters, 1920? 1920. I'll, you just never know when you're asked, you may be asked to give this talk again. Anything else? All righty. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You've made it easy.
Thank you, Dr. Owen, and thank you all for again being here tonight. I want to give special thanks again to the University of Louisville for hosting our event, and Dean Smith and Jackie Gutterman and Kyle Durbin here at U of L. We greatly appreciate that. I also would want to draw your attention to Julia Least, who's in the background back there. She's the one who planned all of this at Legal Aid. She never gets up on this side of things, but she's always in the background. So Julia, thank you very much. Excellent work. And then also before we go, I want to be sure to introduce you to somebody new. I want to ask Jefferson Coulter to come up. Jefferson Coulter is your new executive director of the Legal Aid Society. Jefferson joins us from the North. Stay up here. Stay up here. You're not getting away that quickly. He joins us from the Northwest Justice Project, and I'm proud to pass the torch of justice to Jefferson. And then I'm going to call on one other person back there, Mr. Jeffrey Bean, who was my predecessor. You have to do what I tell you to. Come on down here. Thank you, Jeff. So you all know Jeff Bean, and we wouldn't be where we are today at Legal Aid Society without his leadership, and we appreciate you being here tonight. And I'm just proud to get to stand with you all. And like I said earlier, I'm proud to just be here with all of you. Everyone in this room has a special place at Legal Aid Society, and you're a very special part of the work. So I want you to know that this is your 100th birthday, your celebration of work and service to the community. We all do this together as a community to serve in the community in which we live. So thank you all for everything that you've done. I would invite you to stay tuned for events in 2023. We're going to have a party. We're going to have a gala. We're going to have a community fair. Lots of great things going on. So stay tuned for those events. And then tonight, before we go, we get to go have a champagne toast out in the lobby. So I invite you to adjourn and join us over there where we'll celebrate a little bit more. Thank you all.